Guerrilla warfare techniques. Used during the Vietnam War. During the Vietnam War, guerrilla warfare was a crucial strategy employed by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, NVA, to combat the technologically superior U.S. military. Utilizing the dense jungle terrain, underground networks, and a variety of unconventional tactics, the guerrillas relied on hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, traps, and psychological warfare to harass and wear down American forces. Their ability to blend with the environment, avoid direct confrontations, and exploit U.S. vulnerabilities made them a formidable force in a protracted conflict that ultimately led to the U.S. withdrawal from Vietnam. Hit-and-run tactics. The Viet Cong and NVA often relied on ambushes to strike at larger, more heavily armed U.S. patrols or convoys, typically in areas where American forces were least prepared, such as along jungle trails or near rural villages. These surprise attacks allowed the guerrillas to inflict casualties quickly and then disperse into the environment, making it difficult for U.S. forces to retaliate effectively. In addition to ambushes, the Viet Cong preferred to target isolated U.S. outposts, supply lines, and small units with hit-and-run tactics, avoiding large-scale confrontations. This approach allowed them to disrupt American operations without risking direct combat with the superior U.S. military. Booby traps and mines, punji sticks, were an infamous Viet Cong booby trap intended to kill and demoralize Marines in Vietnam. Traps were set with sharp bamboo pegs in leaf or dirt ditches. When a soldier stepped on the trap, the spikes would pierce their feet or legs, incapacitating them and forcing teammates to carry them to safety, burdening the unit. Tripwires on grenades, mines, and other explosives were another trap. These traps killed or injured unwary soldiers. U.S. forces worried about when and where the next trap would be laid by these explosives' shock and unpredictability. Landmines were carefully positioned along roads, pathways, and military bases to target infantry and vehicles. Remote or foot-triggered mines kill U.S. troops and impede supply convoys. Ground mines made even ordinary missions dangerous for Americans. These traps affect U.S. personnel mentally and physically as guerrilla warfare. Tunnels and underground networks. The Cu Chi tunnels are famous Vietnam War guerrilla warfare examples. The Viet Cong built these massive subterranean networks around Saigon to survive and resist. The tunnels provided hiding places, housing quarters, weapon and supply storage, and escape routes for guerrillas. American forces could not see the Viet Cong because of the underground system. Surprising attacks from the tunnels and fast retreats made rebels nearly impossible to detect or eliminate. The tunnel system's secrecy allowed the Viet Cong to move around the region. They could stealthily enter American bases, destroy, and obtain intelligence. Tunnels were also psychologically beneficial. U.S. soldiers lived in fear of tunnels because they never knew when or where they would be. American forces were demoralized by the prospect of tunnels below or nearby, making it a valuable Viet Cong psychological tactic. Camouflage and stealth guerrilla soldiers in Vietnam were adept at hiding in deep jungles and rural areas. They hid themselves, their weapons, and equipment with leaves, branches, and dirt. They were nearly invisible to U.S. forces in the thick jungle. Whether in the bush or in rural settlements, guerrillas could hide their movements and positions, making them hard to trace or combat. Girls often moved at night and blended in with the environment. Nighttime missions made U.S. troops more exposed, but darkness shielded them. The rebels could enter enemy positions, lay bombs, and conduct reconnaissance at night without being seen. Moving at night let them ambush, disrupt, and assault supply lines without facing bigger, more heavily armed American soldiers. Psychological warfare. The dense jungles of Vietnam were a crucial advantage for the Viet Cong and NVA, providing natural cover that allowed them to operate stealthily and avoid detection by U.S. forces. guerrilla fighters skillfully used the jungle terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes along trails, planting booby traps, and launching surprise attacks on American patrols. The thick foliage and difficult terrain also made it challenging for U.S. forces to track or engage the guerrillas effectively, as they could retreat into areas where American forces struggled to navigate or set up operations. Small, flexible units. The Viet Cong and NVA operated using a cell-based structure, which involved small, highly mobile units rather than large, conventional formations. These small groups could quickly disperse after an attack, making it difficult for U.S. forces to pinpoint their location or track them down. When necessary, the units would reconvene in different areas, maintaining constant mobility and unpredictability. This decentralized approach allowed them to remain elusive and evade large-scale retaliation by American forces. Additionally, the guerrilla fighters operated under a decentralized command system where decisions were often made by local leaders based on the immediate situation. This structure gave the units flexibility and autonomy, enabling them to adapt rapidly to changing circumstances without waiting for orders from a central command. As a result, it was harder for U.S. forces to dismantle the guerrilla network, as there was no central command to target or disrupt. Protracted war of attrition. By inflicting significant fatalities on the American forces, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, adopted a tactic of attrition with the intention of gradually weakening the resolve of the Americans. The United States was required to deploy a considerable number of troops in order to prevent direct, large-scale confrontations that could result in catastrophic setbacks for the insurgents. Their guerrilla tactics were responsible for this constraint. Not only did the guerrillas engage in physical warfare, but they also engaged in psychological warfare in the hope of wearing down the resources and morale of the United States over the course of time. Blending conventional and guerrilla tactics. There were times when the Viet Cong would participate in more conventional, large-scale fights, particularly if it permitted them to do major damage to American forces. This was the case even though the Viet Cong depended primarily on guerrilla tactics. The Tet Offensive, which took place in 1968, is a famous example of this phenomenon. It revealed the Viet Cong's capacity to organize and carry out coordinated, large-scale assaults when the circumstances were favorable. It was demonstrated through this change in strategy that they were capable of engaging in conventional warfare under the appropriate circumstances. Thanks for watching and subscribing, channel.